All right, welcome to the fifth installment of the Kentucky Elk Hunting webinar series. So in this episode, we're going to have some serious talk about elk hunting in Kentucky. This is something that Joe and I, it's an episode that we didn't do last year and felt like we needed to, and put it on the list for this year. So it's going to essentially be a rundown of topics that we feel like hunters stumble on every year. A lot of these topics we're going to cover in later webinars, but it's stuff to be thinking about now. And so as we go through that, there's going to be, I'm going to call it serious talk, straight talk, the hard truths of elk hunting in Kentucky. It's what it is. So we'll get to that here in just a bit. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items before we jump in. So we've got 4 episodes of this webinar series up on my profile on YouTube right now. Give them a watch. So we are getting close to that July 1 area draw deadline. We've got about 2 hours of content to cover basically everything you need to know to navigate that process and to set yourself up well for getting the unit you want or getting the regulated area that you want. Now, those are 2 important things coming up. So also be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. You'll get automatically notified when we put stuff up. And also all the other content that Kentucky Fish and Wildlife is putting up here over the summer. And as always, let us know if you got questions about your elk hunt. So the calls have kind of slowed down a little bit. We're talking back and forth with some people that they're, in the process of doing their thing. I've got a few calls I need to get to this week, but if you have a question, give us a call. So we've got myself and Joe, Mark Peterson and Dan Crank, our other 2 elk biologists that'll be on a couple of these upcoming webinars. They are there to answer your questions. So, use us as a resource. We don't want any unanswered questions left out there. We want to set you up as good as you can. So back into this webinar. So why are we shooting a webinar on this, serious topics, hard truths of elk hunting in Kentucky? And that really is a good question. So Joe and I and the other elk biologists, we talk to a couple of hundred hunters each season. So if you remember, we've got 594 drawn hunters out there. There's a good chance we're talking to well over half of them in any given season. Many of you we're going to talk to multiple times, which is great. That's part of the enjoyment that I personally get going through this process, is talking with those people that have done the background work and that are asking good questions. So honestly, in almost every case, so those hunters that are unprepared for their hunt end up having, not a very pleasurable experience on their Kentucky elk hunt. We can glean that information. So everybody that's got an elk tag this year is going to do an end of the season hunter survey, which gives us lots of good information. We've got all that up on the web. You can kind of look into their experiences last year, but there's a section at the end of that where we have 4 written comments. And those comments vary from "this was the greatest experience of my life" to "I absolutely had a terrible time and I'm never applying for a Kentucky elk tag again." And honestly, I read them every year. Joe reads them every year. He crunches all that data and tries to summarize those written responses. Again, they're on the web in last year's survey, but I don't know if heartbreaking is the word for it, but a lot of times those people with the bad experiences are maybe people we never interacted with, or people that we interacted with like the Friday afternoon before their hunt started. Where they were just starting that preparation at that point, and it's, much too late in the game to do it. Or they had, a lot of times I feel like I'll talk to somebody who's like, "Oh, my buddy killed one here in 2009. That's where I'm going to go." Everything's changed. Nothing, the good old days of easily harvested elk are over. And, that's one of the points we're going to make, and we'll get to that towards the end. This webinar is not meant to scare anybody. It's meant to motivate. And I think our biggest goal here is to point out just what we've seen over the years of interacting with elk hunters and seeing the final results. And essentially we've got kind of 13 bullets on a list that we've got. Joe and I passed them back and forth earlier this week and kind of boiled them down. I think honestly we could have about 40 things on this list, but in the interest of trying to hit the high points, we've got 13. So this is definitely one of those webinars that you can listen to as a podcast. You can turn it on while you're cooking dinner. You can turn it on in the car, whatever you need to do, because it's going to be me and Joe. We don't have a lot of visuals. We just wanted to have some serious talk about what to expect. So, as I mentioned when we started, as I mentioned every webinar, and I think those folks that have called and talked to us or looked at our information on the website will agree that our number one goal over the summer is to help our elk hunters. And honestly, my goal is to have 100% success rate. That's unrealistic. It's hunting. Otherwise we'd call it the elk kill permit if it if it was 100, guaranteed 100% success rate. It's just not going to happen. And one point that really comes to the surface that Joe pointed out is that we are much more effective at helping people who are on top of things and who are doing their homework. I love helping somebody that's been to an area and scouted. We know, pretty much about every nook and cranny in the elk zone, and I can really help people that have laid eyes on their area. And, we'll talk about scouting. That's definitely one of the bullet points. So, Joe, before we jump in, do you have anything to throw in?
No, like you said, just to reiterate, the whole point of this one is purely just to get some stuff out there in front of you guys to make you aware of it, things that we constantly hear about that maybe make someone's experience a little less enjoyable, or let's call it a missed opportunity, on some of the previous hunters' parts. Yes, it's not all inclusive. It's just some of the bigger stuff that we see, just to make you guys aware of, because there's a lot that goes into it. And most of our hunters aren't going to be from the elk management zone. You're not familiar with this, or it might be your first time even in that country. So we're just trying to get some of this stuff out in front of you, so you have time to prepare and think about it as the season goes on.
Absolutely. All right, let's jump into number one. And this is one that the first couple of episodes have highlighted over and over, but do your basic homework. That's an important one. And we, Joe and the other folks in the elk program have spent lots of time preparing good information that is pretty easily digestible to get everybody dialed in on what they need to do. So two big sources of info, like we've said, my profile and the elk pages on our website. We got lots of good stats posted for the area draw. So I've talked to a couple people that are, everybody's in the midst of trying to figure out their strategy for the area draw. There's some great info that you can pull from last year's applications. How people selected, when, did units go to, take an RA, for example, did it go to everybody with a first choice? That's all stuff to be looking at. And then don't forget about the elk hunting unit and RA draw. We have people every year. There's throw me out. What's your estimate on the number of people that have 0 selections?
I think last year was about 10%, a little over 60 of our hunters that made no selections.
Right. And that's not necessarily saying they didn't do that by choice, but if you don't make a selection, you're going to get put in a random unit without question. It's going to be a random unit, and there is no way possible that you will get a regulated area to hunt on. You're going to get a random unit.
At least let's clarify, at least in the initial
right,
selection period.
Yeah. So we've got the leftover draw opening August 8th. That's an opportunity to get into a regulated area for sure. So, if you want a random unit, great. Take your chances, see how it falls out. But, putting in the homework now to more or less figure out where you want to hunt, what unit you want to be in, and what RA, might best suit you is important. And I think this is a good thing. This is a good time to roll in. We had a question, it was, I can't remember if it was a disabled hunter or an older fellow that was looking for some country that was easily hunted. That's really part of the kind of the early, doing your homework part. We do have some regulated areas with good road systems that are going to be a little bit easier to hunt than, say, some of our big mountain public land, maybe down in Unit 3. So that's all stuff to be thinking about on the front end. And then we're going to talk about mapping and kind of WMA boundaries here in a little bit, but familiarize yourself with the elk zone maps and do some e-scouting. You know, turn on topo maps on Onyx maps, look at Google Earth, use the tilt to, see what kind of mountains we're talking about. And that may help, kind of point you in a direction that matches your abilities, or at least help you realize that we're actually talking about some mountains out here for sure. So any more on that first point?
I don't know if you want to touch about it now or later. I think this might be a better part because we've already kind of discussed the area selection draw, but like you mentioned, you for sure are going to be placed into a random unit if you don't make any selections, right? That's just the nature of the beast. And even if you make all 5 selections, you spend a lot of time going into it and thinking about it, there's still a small chance that you might not get something that you want. Unfortunately, that's something that we just can't help. We try our best to make the best opportunities for everybody, but at the end of the day, the system we have in place is designed to distribute hunting pressure, and that's what we have. I don't think it's a reason to despair if you automatically end up somewhere that you didn't necessarily want to start with, because at the end of the day, you still have an elk tag, right? And if you're willing to put in some time and effort into figuring out this new place, wherever it may be, you still have a really good opportunity to get out there and hunt, right? There are people, countless numbers of people who've never been drawn for a Kentucky elk permit who would like to be in your position. So, I would encourage people not to despair if you do happen to get something that you don't want. And you got to keep in mind too that about 50% of our elk in Kentucky are killed on private property of some form or fashion, right? So even if you do get a particular RA or whatever, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, but spend some time, talk to people, try to figure out different places that you can go. As I said, there's a lot of people that would like to have this opportunity that you all currently have, and we see that in the comments. It's a direct, people just say, well, I didn't get what I wanted, so I didn't go hunting in Kentucky. I'm never doing this again. It's a sham. It's not really. It's the system's in place for a reason, and if you're willing to put a little bit of time and effort into it, you can be successful no matter where you end up.
Yep, absolutely. It happens every year. There'll be hunters we talk to that'll knock on some doors and get a really good spot to hunt. I know personally, I've run into hunters at the gas station. By the time they pumped their gas and bought some snacks, the next guy that pulled up had a place that they could go on some private property. And it, the folks at Eastern Kentucky, great folks, they want everybody to be successful and want them to have a good time elk hunting. So definitely something to think about. And I think that's a good place to put that sort of in, doing your homework. If you know somebody down there, if you got a past acquaintance that in the elk zone, call them, because I guarantee you they're going to know somebody that may have some elk on their property for sure. So, all right, let's jump to number 2, and this sort of ties right into number 1. Actually, the first 3 could probably all be lumped together, but number 2, start thinking about your hunt now. And I will tie in a current story. Joe and I were lucky enough to get us some Colorado tags for the fall. And we figured that out last Friday. That was the Colorado drawing, and I'm already feeling behind. So in some regards, the 2 of us are going to be going through the same thing that all the drawn Kentucky elk hunters are. So it's one of those things that I've been somewhat consumed with figuring out what gear I need and all that business. But a lot of the stuff we're talking today is actually stuff that I need to get deeper into my brain as we prepare for an elk hunt as well. So as I said in point 1, there's plenty of people that gloss over the area draw and never read any of the info on the web. I talk to, we get phone calls the week before the hunt, and I feel bad. We do as much as we can for those folks, but ultimately it comes down to, well, I got an elk tag, I'll worry about it. If it's a cow tag or something, I'll worry about it, the week before Thanksgiving and get things figured out. Our best advice is to start thinking about it now. Really, when you think about it, the summer will fly by. Everybody's by nature busier in the summer. You got family vacations, you got different things going So especially for those archery and our bull gun hunters, you know, that are going to be hunting there September, first part of October, it's going to breeze right by. Be thinking about it now. That's my number one point that I'll make on point number 2 there. You good with that?
I think you said it perfect.
That works.
We found out 3 days ago, and I do feel behind already.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, a little bit of a panic before we recorded this. Joe was talking about how the boots he just bought don't fit, so you know that puts you a little bit further behind. So, but we'll get to it. So, all right. Point number 3: plan on making a scouting trip. You know, we've got a couple of months before anybody's going to be hunting elk. If you can, I know gas prices. I filled up for like a $4.74 yesterday. It's not good, you know, when you're expecting at least a tank of gas to get to the elk zone and back. But do what you can to weave in a scouting trip. You know, plan this into your summer or fall, depending on what tag type you've got. You really, in my opinion, are at a serious disadvantage if you show up to your hunting unit completely blind. And that is something, you know, that's Joe and I talked about a Colorado tag. We're more than likely going to be showing up blind, unless I get a wild hair and drive out there this summer, which I'm thinking about. But nonetheless, it's not ideal. I've got some trepidations about showing up blind out there. I think it is very important to get a look at the land you're going to be on, to have some knowledge of the road system. I mean, a lot of this mine land country in East Kentucky, there's roads and places all over it, but they're not necessarily going to be readily viewable. You're not gonna, you know, you might not even see them on a map. It's one of those things, just, you know, over the years spending time working on my research project in Eastern Kentucky, it was highly advantageous for me trying to dart bull elk to know every topographical feature and little trail and everywhere in there, and there's tons of it. And so just getting out there and at least knowing the major road system, where if you're hearing a bull bugle 2 mountains over, you know that maybe I can save a couple hours and drive around this way as opposed to walking over 2 mountains. That's all important. If you just get down there on a weekend and take an off-roading trip and drive around whatever roads we've got on public land, that will be worth it. Get out there and see the country. You know, it all will make, especially, you know, our bull gun hunters have a 5-day season. A little bit of knowledge of the area before daylight cracks on opening day will really go a long way and add to that. You know, you're more effectively going to be able to hunt that 5-day period. My advice would be make it fun some way. Take the family camping. You go camping. You know, take a hike. Summer squirrel season, you know, I think is open maybe now, I don't know. And then obviously opens up mid-August. Go out there and squirrel hunt. Give yourself a reason to pack a gun around in the elk woods. It'd be a good time to find where the acorns are dropping. And honestly, growing up as a flatlander from far west Kentucky, I think at least my first trip to the mountains was pretty eye-opening in terms of I think I remember thinking, oh, these are actually mountains. So something to keep in mind if you're not from the elk zone. Joe, jump in.
To build on this, I mean, I know, you know, like I said, gas prices are high right now, and it does, you know, it's a hindrance, right? Like it'd be something I could have done last year, you know, driving to our unit in Colorado for a reasonable price, you know, just ahead of time. It's not something I can really do now. But there are so many new things that are available, right? You can do e-scouting now, right? And you can like set a pin in a place and to get like a 360-degree view or roughly of it, you know, just get an idea of the area and the terrain. So at least you're doing something. And that way you know, you're not going in 100% blind. You still don't know exactly like maybe how the aerial imagery converts to real life stuff, but it's going to give you something to do that's better than nothing, and identify some extra places. And like you said, the road network is definitely challenging. You know, I've been down there. I worked in East Kentucky for like 10 years now. I still have to stop and think about sometimes, where am I going? How do I get there? And like you said, people aren't from the area, you might be 4 miles, 5 miles as the crow flies. It might take you an hour to get there on the road network. Nothing is straight. Nothing is really intuitive in a lot of cases, especially like in, when you get off the main highways. So it does take a while, and you don't want to burn up a day or two of your hunting time, just going, oh gosh, well, I don't know where I'm at. I can't figure out how to get here. I relied on Google Maps and it took me in the completely wrong place, which can happen. So have that stuff lined out ahead of time, and it'll help you. And there's other things too, right? For most people that aren't from East Kentucky, there's a coal industry. It's not quite as prevalent as it used to be, but there are certain routes that these trucks will take that, what might take you 20 or 30 minutes to drive normally, if you get behind a coal truck, it's going to take you an hour and a half, right? So even knowing like end arounds for something like that to get to your hunting spot on time, just anything like that that can help you cut that learning curve. Just trying to figure out, basically the lay of the land, because it is so much different. So those are the things that I would, try to highlight when I'm talking about, the scouting trips, even if you can't, do one in person.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll throw in there that if you haven't been to East Kentucky, there's tons of stuff to do. Go to Cumberland Gap, go to Kingdom Come State Park. Where was that? Bad Branch Falls.
Bad Branch.
I mean, you could easily pack the family up and keep them occupied while still doing a little elk scouting on the side. That's not a bad way to play it if you have to. So yeah, definitely get out and scout. And back to what I said before we started, we are much more effective at helping people through their elk hunt if they've seen the country. And that'll really come into after the area draw, when you know exactly where you're going. That's sort of when we can really get tied in with the hunters better and give them some good, solid local information on those areas. So let's jump into number 4. We're going to keep this one real short, and that is get your gear dialed in now. We've talked about it a little bit, in the thinking about your hunt thing. And I will say that next week's webinar is going to be on sort of a 2-parter on physical preparation and necessary gear. So last year, Joe and our other elk biologist, Mark Peterson, did a typical like day hunt bag dump, which I think will be good and eye-opening for everybody. We say it, most hunters have the gear that they're going to need, but there are a couple things that if you got a little extra money laying around, that would be highly advantageous to have. Good pack being one of those, good set of boots being one of those. So, and again, I mentioned it, the gun hunters have a 5-day hunt. Don't go in with any, make sure your gear's dialed. You don't want it to break on day 2 and then you're out, maybe you miss an afternoon, maybe you miss a whole day of hunt. You want to be able to capitalize on those 5 days. So you got anything quickly to throw in? If not, we'll jump.
Just the real life example of me right now, right? Don't wait to get some of these things that you're going to need, like a pair of boots, right? I got a pair of boots that I've had a similar style before yesterday, and they don't fit. Had I just waited, I'd be in a bit of a pickle, right? So the stuff that you need, go ahead and start looking at it, try to get it figured out. Because the last thing you want to do is, wait till 2 days before your hunt, you don't have it. Yeah, that's my real life example. That's current.
Exactly. And I will say, and we're just in preparing for elk hunts and buying gear, everybody in the country is buying gear right now in the summer. I know a few things just in buying. I wanted a set of different hunting pants before I went out west a couple of years ago, and they were sold out about the 1st of June and never were back in stock till the next season. So get on that stuff fast. So we'll jump right into number 5, and it is simply listed as shoot. And it's something that I feel like most of my life I took for granted. You'd pull the deer rifle out, you'd shoot it 3 or 4 times on the bench a week before the season, you're ready to go. And that's one of those things that, shooting deer from a deer stand, that's a pretty good, maybe you got a nice rest, maybe you're used to that because you've been deer hunting since you were a young kid. Elk hunting specifically, you're more than likely going to be on your feet, you're more than likely going to be moving. You're going to be in terrain that you're not necessarily used to hunting in. So get your gun and bow out now, get familiar with it. one thing I will say that in many times, the thing that separates a successful hunter from those that are unsuccessful is their ability to make the shot that's given to them. Elk are big and tough. They, especially during bull season, if you're calling it elk, they tend to come in facing you. They've got no necessarily reason to give you a beautiful broadside shot. So you got to be able to make that shot because you might only get one opportunity at it. Another thing from my previous experience elk hunting was I vastly overestimated my ability to shoot off a tripod or a set of shooting sticks. I just thought that was going to be like laying on the bench rest with sandbags. I couldn't have been any more wrong. It was with an open-sighted muzzleloader, as the regs are in Colorado, but I just thought, all right, this thing's dialed, shooting good, been shooting it off a bench rest. I'm gonna take my sticks out in the back pasture and had some targets printed out on a piece of notebook paper. I wasn't hitting notebook paper at 100 yards, and it was a sobering experience. And to tie everything back into getting your stuff dialed now, this was like a month out from my hunt. So I could shoot it, as good as I needed to off sandbags, but I was another month and, probably 100 shots to where I felt confident off shooting sticks. That ultimately paid off. I was able to make a shot that was fairly long for, within the range that I was comfortable with, but it was a long shot and I had a moment to take it. Ended up coming home from Colorado with a bull elk. So practice. Be able to shoot in those odd positions. Whether it's shooting your rifle from a turkey hunting position, where anybody that's turkey hunted pretty comfortable with that. It might be leaning up against a tree. Practice that kind of stuff, that kind of weird shooting arrangements. I guess if that's kind of my number one point, because when that shot presents itself, and a lot of our bulls are going to be killed in timbered areas. You've got them walking between trees and stopping in little gaps. You've got to be able to seal the deal when you're given that gift of a bull elk that actually stops and looks around to see who's, see what cow's making noise and drawing him over. So, got to be able to capitalize on that opportunity. Joe?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Elk hunting is a game of opportunities, and you might only get one. You want to make sure you capitalize on it. I mean, if you blow it out, you mess up, that herd that was on that small tract you're on is probably going to be onto another property. You might not be able to get back onto them again. I would encourage you while you're shooting. I know we talked about it some in the archery session, but run around a little bit while you're doing it too. Get your heart rate up, to try to simulate that adrenaline. For people who've never done it, even if you have, it's a huge thrill, right? Like that's part of the reason we all do this stuff, is because it is fun and it gets your heart rate up. But a lot of people just practice, like you said, on like a lead sled or sandbags, or your standard shooting 40 yards at a block target, right? Do something weird, different positions, get your heart rate up, try to simulate that real encounter the best you can, because more likely that's what's going to happen. You're going to either be like, oh, climb, he's right over this ridge, and you've got 3 seconds to make something happen, and your heart rate's beating and your glasses are fogged up or whatever, right? Just practicing some different stuff, get your heart rate up.
Yeah, I'll agree. It's just a different experience than deer hunt, where you're sitting there calmly. I get buck fever like the rest of you, but at least in a deer stand, you're sitting there calm. You got a little wiggle room to move and kind of that kind of stuff. It's just a different being on your feet, actually chasing them. And even for cow season, a lot of times to get that cow shot, you might have to run and try to get in front of, the herd's moving, feeding along. You might have to tuck around behind a mountain and get in front of them or something. You're going to be on your feet, stalking through the woods. And I feel like that's, even with turkey hunting, it's not necessarily something that applies. It's not skills that most of us that are deer and turkey hunters are gonna have, if that makes sense. Yeah. So, just walking around in the woods with your rifle and resting off a tree and seeing how that feels. Better yet, take a target out with you and set it up and try some different positions. So all good stuff. Shooting off your backpack, that's another one that I meant to throw in. you know, kind of learn to have an improvised rest. You might be in a place where you're shooting off your backpack and have a 250, 300, 400 yard shot where, you know, it can be done off a backpack if you've practiced and kind of know how to get good and solid. So, all right, shoot. I'll leave that.
I agree.
Jump into number 6. I just threw this one in there because I love it. It's learn to call elk. Take a little time. It's been, I will say, and you know, Joe's dying to kill a mule deer out west. I am firmly hooked on hunting bugling elk and calling them in, almost to the point where I won't even say. I was going to say that if I didn't call an elk in, I might not even be interested in shooting it. I love that. I love turkey hunting. I love calling elk in. And really over the last, probably in the last 2 years, Joe will tell a great story where I tried to bugle one day in the heat of the moment and it was terrible. Really in the last 2 years have I spent time, you know, investigated the types of calls. I'd just gone to, you know, Sportsman's Warehouse and got a Primos bugle, which is a great call. I didn't know how to use it. But spend some time, look at the calls that are available and take a minute. There is hours and hours of instruction on YouTube. We're going to do a webinar down the road on elk calling, but there's hours and hours. Elk hunting 101. Most of the Western hunting YouTube personalities have really good instructional elk calling videos where they'll tell you, you know, everything from how to place the reed in your mouth to what kind of calls you need to be making. I've got this one in there because it adds so much more fun to the hunt if you can interact with that animal, and it adds an advantage than just simply still hunting them or, you know, stalking through the woods trying to get around them. I will also say, even for cow hunters, know how to make a cow call. That will stop a herd of elk. A calf distress call or a calf call sometimes will, you know, get a bedded cow to stand up and maybe walk over towards you a little bit. It's something to have in your toolbox. You know, it's a good time to learn the skill. It's fun. So Joe can call elk long before I ever could. So if you got anything to throw in there.
Yeah, it's not that I'm a really good elk caller, it's just that he used to be really, really bad. And it was pretty comical. No, I'll definitely pick it up. It is a fun skill, right? I mean, I learned mainly driving back and forth to work, blowing bugle tubes and stuff. You get some weird looks, but that kills the time, crushes that monotonous drive, and it's fun. And it, you know, like I said, there's so many scenarios where just even the ability to make any sound helps you. It was actually a really good point on that calf and distress call. It's so effective. We used to use it on a Fox Pro to dart elk with. You would throw up a calf and distress call, and here would come the herd, you know, trying to find where that big cow was or that injured calf was. I will say you can't use electronic calls in Kentucky, but it's just to highlight that it is effective and it's fun. You know, it's like you said, you're interactive. You know, that's what makes it fun. It's what makes like duck hunting and turkey hunting fun, right? You are working with that animal, playing a different game of cat and mouse, trying to force it to do stuff that it might necessarily or might not otherwise want to do or be wired to do. So it just adds a new level of complexity that's really enjoyable.
Yeah, and it's fun. If you do it once, you'll end up like Joe and I, and you'll, you know, put in for some Western elk tag every year just to have the opportunity to hunt bugle and elk. So a lot of fun. That was kind of, you know, that's not necessarily serious talk, but get serious and learn how to call elk. So
yeah, it doesn't have to be crazy, you know.
No.
So, sorry. Well, I mean, we'll talk about it later, but like anybody can do it. There's little push button calls. You know, that's all the effort it takes to make a good cow sound. You know, so anything.
Absolutely.
That's it. Sorry.
No, let's all right. Jumping into number 7. This is where I am. I think we're both going to get a little serious on this one. Get in the best shape that you can. Again, we're going to talk about this, you know, in some more length next week. Neither one of us are medical doctors or exercise physiologists, but we've done it. We're in the midst of preparations this summer for hunting at what's probably going to be 10 or 11,000 feet out west. So I've got to double down on what I might normally do, you know, if I was going to be working in Eastern Kentucky. So get in the best shape that you can. And that really, we've got all people from all walks of life in this pool of drawn elk hunters. We completely understand that. There's going to be everybody from somebody that ran a triathlon last week to, you know, people in, you know, senior citizens that want to hunt. Everybody can do it. All we're asking is that you get in the best shape that you can. It doesn't have to be any kind of thing where you're going to the gym 7 days a week, getting out every day and taking a stroll. Just do more than you have done in the past, and I can promise you it will pay off out there on your elk hunt. So, you know, specifically this summer, I enjoy, I think in my kind of yearly routine is I'll tend to get in better shape in the summer, slack off a little bit in the fall. I try to get in pretty good shape November, December, January. We usually have our fire, wildland fire physical fitness test that motivates me. Also doing a bunch of our bear research in the winter and being in the mountains. And I continually hire, you know, a crop of, you know, early 20s technicians every year that I don't want to be out hiked by. So that's good motivation for me, but there are these kind of ups and downs in my year. And something like this elk hunt is just good motivation to get out there, make yourself healthier, and put a big advantage, you know, put the ball in your court as far as being able to get up the mountain to that bugling bull. You know, it's one of those things that we talk to a lot of hunters that just simply didn't think they could go to where the elk were, or just didn't want to go to where the elk were. And that's understandable. I've said the same thing standing on top of a mountain before. But give yourself the opportunity to actually get there. Most people can, but put all the advantages you got in your court. Some of the simple stuff at its most simple, get out and do some walking. If you want to add to that, get out and walk with a weighted pack. That's actually the number one thing that I do that I think is effective for getting me in the exact type of shape that I need. You know, you're going to be walking with a pack. You might get lucky enough to have to pack an elk out, and you're going to be on some uneven, steep ground. So find that, put some weight in the pack, 25, 30 pounds, and get moving. You know, whatever else it takes, not a bad idea to hit the gym, do a variety of things, but at its bare minimum, get out and walk, get out and do some hiking, and that will pay off. Joe?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Man, I'm guilty of as anybody else. The whole COVID situation has got me a little bit below where I normally am in terms of my activity level. So I'm definitely picking it back up. And, you know, the same way that I prepare is probably going to be different than everybody else. Like you said, just get moving. It'll make your body feel better. But ultimately, that type of stuff and knowing your limitations and how, you know, your level of fitness is going to determine what you can do on this hunt. And it'll tie directly into the next point that we're making: have a plan to get your elk out, right?
Yep.
If you know you can't do those types of things, then you need to plan accordingly, right? Or if you are in a little bit better, you know, shape fitness wise, and you're able to do a lot more stuff, you have a lot more options at your disposal. So I can't stress enough, you know, these mountains are not, they're not tiny. I actually had a comment from a guy who hunted from Colorado last year on our survey. He said, you know, I thought I'd walk into this place and it'd be a cakewalk. He said, they're not that tall, but I'll tell you right now, they're steep and they're hard. So, I mean, it's just a fact of you know, reality in Eastern Kentucky. You just need to be in the best shape you can. And I said, it's going to determine the level of your hunt, not even your overall enjoyment of the hunt, right? If you're out there sucking wind the whole time, or you're afraid to go chase after these elk because you're waiting for one to be on top that you can drive to, I mean, it's a missed opportunity. You're probably going to go home unsatisfied when it's something you could have hopefully tried to address.
Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, when we do our bear work in the winter, part of me getting in shape is just to make it an enjoyable experience. It adds to that, you know, I'm not tired and sucking wind all the time, and you can really sit there and enjoy the experience. So we will have that on a webinar next week. We'll talk a little bit more in depth, kind of what we do to prepare. And we'll also have some resources. There's some great resources online to prepare. So we'll get into all that stuff. So number 8, like Joe said, it ties right back to getting in shape. have a plan for getting your harvested elk out of the woods. And I can't tell you, I feel like this has happened less in recent years, but years ago, I could guarantee you that somebody would come in the front door of the hazard office at 10 o'clock at night and literally have an elk in a creek at the bottom of the mountain and no even remote possibility that they're going to get that thing out. So, just us traveling around, taking samples from hunted animals. It used to be, I mean, we'd run into so many people in that pickle that, I would always carry a pack frame. I mean, there's no other way. Obviously, we're not going to let that elk spoil. No other way but then jumping in and helping. It just seemed like every corner you went around, somebody else was in that situation. There was years ago, a hunter called us, so we were sampling from the gut pile. So we asked hunters to call us when they killed. This was for a research project years ago. Well, his elk was in the bottom of the creek, but that's where the gut pile was. Sure. So we go down there and it was kind of like, what's your plan for getting this out? We were 1,000 feet off the top of the mountain. And, if you walk the creek out, probably 6 or 7 miles from anywhere you could get a vehicle to. And there was no plan whatsoever. He was just stoked to have an elk killed and was gonna wing it. So don't be that fella. Whether you bring a hunting partner, it's one of those things. Whether you coordinate with a guide as part of their service, that's an option. But it really comes back to know your limitations and then be skilled on how to properly care for your game. There's lots of nights during even the early archery season where you could hang an elk overnight and it would be fine. Quartered in a game bag, hung in a tree. Worst case scenario, you can drive out of there and, run through town and try to load you up a truck bed full of fellas that are going to help you pack it out. So having those skills to properly care for that game animal. So we will have, I think we've got it on the list.
Yeah, somewhere on down the line. We're near season, I think.
Yeah, about the first, I think I've got it on here, the first or second week of August. We've got one of our elk guides in Kega does a really good presentation on packing out an elk, brings up a lot of pertinent points. So be thinking about it now. Again, lots of stuff on YouTube. Randy Newberg does a great gutless quartering method video that I've personally watched. So have a plan to get it out of the woods. Got anything to add to that one?
Nothing except you owe it to the animal, right?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
We don't have a wanton waste law, anything like that, but you went out and took it, you harvested it, you owe everything in your power to get that thing out of the woods in an edible, usable function.
Yep. And that's a great point. Anytime I approach an elk hunt, up until the kill, which not saying that happens every time, that ain't even work. The work starts when you got an animal on the ground. So I know people in Kentucky that have got in some pretty bad pickles packing elk out. Had a friend of ours that dropped his cell phone in the snow on a late season cow hunt, and everybody thought he was dead. So, it's one of those things that's when the work starts. Be prepared for that end of it. So, kind of segueing from that, point number 9, working through these, I think this is all good conversation. Point number 9 is have a plan and have a backup plan. And ideally, you want that backup plan to be almost as good as the primary plan. The plan B should be as good as the plan A. I say that because there's so many random things that can happen. And I've got a couple of things down here on my notes just from spending time in East Kentucky. You could have a road washed out.
Or a new gate put up.
or a random gate put up, the day before the hunt. You could have competition that you didn't anticipate in terms of other hunters using that area. And there's 40 or 50 things I could list off that could sideline plan A, and you want to be able to immediately jump to plan B. And I think sort of an idea that's inherent to our draw system here in Kentucky is, oh, I've got this RA, I'm good to go. Well, there could be a million things that happen to that specific RA. Number one, elk might leave. Their legs are 5 feet long. They all decide they want to pack up that night and cross the highway. Hell, they can be in a different unit in an hour. So any number of things can happen. Have a couple of plans. Ideally, you've got about 20 plans. That's but definitely have a backup plan, have a third plan. And that will add a lot to, your success. Jump in on that one.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about Escouting and stuff earlier, right? If you find a place on easily accessible public that looks really, really good, chances are somebody else has found it too, right? So unless you want to step over top of each other all the time, you need to have another place to go or think about. And you mentioned on the RAs, and I'm not sure if we've touched on it before, but all these properties that we own for the most part are privately owned, and things happen. They a couple of them big coal mines we've had that have gone bankrupt before season. We had a couple that we lost during season, right? So if you only have one place that you're focused in on, you're potentially doing yourself a disservice for something that may not even be your fault. We just have no control over. So definitely think about that stuff. Have other options available, and I think it'll benefit you in the long run.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, let's jump into number 10. This is one that we've got a lot of experience with over the years, and that is mine roads are hard on vehicles. So if you've not been on a strip mined area, the roads are muddy, rocky, rough, dusty. The rocks are sharp where they blasted them all off part of the mountain. Maybe you don't buy a new truck for your hunting trip. It's, had a buddy do that in the past, and that's, is what it is. But a lot of the roads are grown up with autumn olive. They will scratch a vehicle. A lot of the public land areas that are wildlife management areas, you can't use an ATV or a UTV on. It's something to think about. So the roads are good that they're travelable. But we could get one of the hurricanes that blows up through the Gulf and dumps 5 inches of rain on us, and the next thing you know, none of them are travelable. So it's just one of those things to think about. When I was running my project where I was spending day in and day out on strip mines, I carried 3 spare tires. The main reason for that was if I got a flat, I could keep working and still have another spare. And then I didn't necessarily have to immediately stop and go to the tire shop. But that just shows the level. I'd go through all 3 of them every year without a doubt. That just shows kind of it's different country than you might have been on anywhere else. So what Joe added in on this point was be self-sufficient. I mean, I've been hung up there 20 times. Joe hung my truck up there this winter without, in a blink of an eye, he slid off into a ditch. Blamed it on my tires, wouldn't have mattered. The thing is, be self-sufficient. Come along, tow strap, basic toolkit, shovels, know how to change your tire. Make sure you got all the tire changing stuff in your truck. We run into people with vehicle problems every single year. And this doesn't mean you got to have, completely built off-road rig or an F-350, that kind of deal. You can get around on these places, SUV. I'd even venture a Subaru type kind of thing, but just be prepared and kind of know your limitations. A lot of these places, there might be limited cell service. You might be coming out from your elk hunt, especially in the early seasons after 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock in the evening. Not a good time to hang up a vehicle, not a good time to tear the oil pan off.
That's when it's going to happen.
Yeah, and it's going to happen. So be careful. Think about that going into it, and just something we're laying the truths out there. That's one of them. Some of this stuff, some of this country, some of these mine roads are rough, absolutely rough on vehicles. So
I'd like to add in on this one. We didn't have a good spot in the agenda. I started taking these notes after we started, but in terms of like trucks and access stuff, I want to really focus on access in and of itself. Over the last couple of years, we've really tried to improve, our access points online, showing you guys the best ways that we know of to get into these properties. That was historically always an issue. So we went to a lot of them, and if you look at like the regulated areas page, you'll see 3 or 4 access points, or however many that we found that were viable and good. That's something to think about, and access in Eastern Kentucky can mean a whole lot of different things, right? So a lot of people just think, well, I'm going to get up here and drive for 20 miles and look for elk from the road. It's not always the case. All we have to do is provide you a place to park, ultimately at the end of the day, to get you out of there. And, you know, like I said, a lot of these things are privately owned, and the landowners simply don't want loads and loads of people driving on their property. So there may just be a parking spot. It still means you have access to get onto the property. You just can't drive and do whatever you want to around it. And that is something we've tried to highlight and address, because we get a lot of complaints about it, but at the end of the day, these guys are letting us hunt, right? So you have to take things like this into consideration. I think the actual rules for access that we had used was a mom can come down from Louisville in her minivan and at least pull off on the side of the road, right? That may be all you get. There are definitely places that you can drive all over, but there are some that you just cannot. And you might have to get out and hoof it quite a ways. It's not always going to be easy. So I wanted to at least throw that in there, just so you guys are aware of it, because we do receive a lot of complaints, but ultimately there's not much we can do about it. Access is defined very broadly in some places in East Kentucky.
Yeah, that's absolutely a great point. That's all going to depend. I mean, specifically for RAs, we've got that information listed. If you're on my profile and hit the view button on the RA, we'll have those access points listed and have some brief notes about what the situation is. It might be pull off next to a gate, don't block the road, kind of one of those deals. So that's all on there. And then if you've got questions about that, of course, shout at us. Joe mentioned it a little bit. My point number 11 was don't hunt from the road. So don't hunt from the road. Like, if you can, you will be highly surprised at the elk sign you find when you get just a little bit off the road. And I'm mainly thinking on, some of the major kind of older coal roads that are going through our WMAs. We'll be down there working the hunt and just see, hunter making a trip in and a trip out and just, glassing from the road. That can be, using the road to get to high points to glass hard away from the road. Good technique. But as far as expecting to see one right up there, these elk have gotten wild. It's like hunting a public land Western elk. They're going to be away from people. When they start hearing the gravel crunch and the trucks coming up the hill, they're going to get away from that. And elk run from the sound of an ATV and UTV. They have been hunted long enough from those types of vehicles to understand what that sound means. It doesn't matter how quiet your ATV or UTV is. When it's quiet before daylight in the morning, you hear it for miles. Throw anything you want in on that one.
Yeah, a blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while, right? But if you're expecting to just go out and drive around on the main roads or any of these roads and find elk, I think you'll probably be disappointed in what you see. They just don't spend a lot of time out there when the vehicles are nearby anymore. It's just the simple nature of the beast. They respond to that pressure. They act like actual elk. A good example of this, 2019, a really good friend of mine had a bull firearm tag, and he went with a local, and they were driving around the last 2 days of their hunt, trying to bugle from the top of these mine roads and get elk to come to them. And they weren't getting a lot of responses. They did have one bull that responded, but they wouldn't come up, right? It wouldn't leave the road. They wouldn't come near the road. So I went with them the next morning, take me to where they were, or where you thought they were last. And he bugled from the road, no response. And I walked 200 yards into the woods down this ridge and called, and then you get a response, right? Just even that little bit, it's not a huge difference, right? But I'm not right on the road. I'm in the timber. I'm moving towards them. You're better at to have responses like that. I cannot stress enough, road hunting is probably not going to be a very effective means for you to harvest a Kentucky elk.
Yep. I'll agree with you on that. Get off, a good tactic for that kind of deal is find a ridge that intersects that road and walk down the ridge. You're not necessarily walking off the top of the mountain, but you're using the topography to get out away from the road without dropping off. In those ridgetop areas, that's where the oaks are. And ultimately that's where the elk can be for sure. So get out there, get on foot. A thing that I noticed is a lot of times when you're bugling for bulls, they won't bugle if you're a mile away. They won't bugle till you're within a couple 100 yards. So moving into the timber and getting in there with them will actually get them fired up when they hear it. So, all right, let's jump into number 12. We got 2 more left. Number 12 is our public lands and our regulated areas are poorly marked. Really, when I say that, the boundaries aren't marked at all. And this is something that we get every year. I had a fellow years ago call and ask where the WMA office was. So those of you that are Kentuckians know about wildlife management areas. If you've been to Ballard in West Kentucky duck hunting, or maybe Taylorsville Lake on a quota hunt, you've got yellow trees on the boundaries. There's an office on site that is usually staffed. None of that exists in East Kentucky. None of that exists on our elk properties. They are big. Most of them we don't own. They're in some form of access agreement. We don't have the resources to mark those boundaries like we would something like Taylorsville Lake, that is going to be a WMA forever, and we can mark that. With that said, it is critically important to understand and figure out a mapping device, whether it's such things as Onyx on your phone, topographic maps, that kind of deal, and know where you're at. We've got some good map resources online, but it's really going to require, ideally, you've got something that goes to the field with you that lets you know exactly where you're at. So today we're working on getting our Onyx layers up to date. That's something that's reasonably priced, works on an iPhone. Most people have smartphones right now. You can also get chips for a GPS with some public land on them, but it is critically important that you've got some strategy for knowing where you're at. It is super easy to end up not on public property. The boundaries, nothing out there is square. Boundaries aren't marked. It intersects. You've got to have some way to know exactly where you're at. I can't stress that highly enough. We'll likely have a webinar down the road on that subject exactly because it's that important, but be thinking about it now. Get used to using it. There's a lot of systems out there that you can get for a moderate fee and be successful. Talking about something like Onyx, make sure you download the offline map so that you've got mapping abilities while you don't have cell service. It's important. It ties back into scouting, to your e-scouting, all that stuff. But don't go out there without a mapping device on our big public areas or even on the small RAs. You want to stay legal. So get a mapping device.
100%. It's almost similar to like Central Kentucky, right? You've got, there are big blocks of property, but a lot of them aren't contiguous, right? So you might have 5 guys that meet up in one little corner, or part of the property might be, might have the main haul road drives right through and you think you're on the same public, but there's actually 3 guys that come across and there's an easement on this road. You can't kill them in this one little spot. It gets really, really dicey in some places. It's not like, the Western states where they have like these large contiguous blocks. We don't have that as often. There are exceptions, but ultimately it is the hunter's responsibility to know where they are while they are hunting. If you are, you're probably going to get a little bit of wiggle room if you're within, a few feet of the boundary line, right? Because nothing's ever going to be exactly perfect. But, you probably will get a ticket if they catch you on a place that you're not supposed to be. And like I said, just saying, well, the boundary's not marked isn't really a good excuse, because it's ultimately on the hunter themselves to know where they are. And we provide all the resources that we can. And there's so much stuff out there available right now. There's not really an excuse to not have an idea where you are.
Yeah, I'll agree. And just to reiterate, a lot of these properties are private land that we have elk hunting access agreements on. It's not necessarily our land in terms of Kentucky Fish and Wildlife to manage. So mapping at your best, having an effective mapping system is your best bet while you're out there. All right, number 13. It's the one that probably everybody's been waiting for now that we've talked for about an hour, but feel like it's all good info. So Kentucky elk have gotten wise to hunting pressure. I'll say that again. Kentucky elk have gotten wise to hunting pressure. Those of you that had a buddy kill one in 09 somewhere, you know, maybe you killed a bull at high noon while it was out grazing. Those days are over. So putting on my elk scientist biologist hat, elk are very, very behaviorally plastic. And I will say that is they are very, very behaviorally adaptable. So, you know, they're also their food intake. So they're not really grazers, they're not really browsers. They instead live on this continuum that, you know, they can float between them really easily. So between them adapting and, you know, their gut being able to easily go from grass one day to acorns in the deep hollow of a timbered, you know, wooded area the next, doesn't really matter to them what they're eating, and they will go to the safe spot. So if you look or think about Western elk hunting, they talk about sanctuary areas. So out there, it's much more open than it is in Kentucky. So you've got these blocks of maybe dark pine timber where they're going to go and hide. Let's call it 97% of the Kentucky elk zone is what they would define as Western escape cover or Western hiding cover. They got plenty of places to go, and they have gotten smart. We've got research that demonstrates this. We've got such things as habitat use, like for my dissertation, bull elk in the fall were using very little open ground during the actual legal hunting hours. They would use, you know, if you looked at the whole 24-hour day together, they would actually use a good amount of open land. It was all at night. It was all at night when they knew they were safe. In the daytime, you know, as the sun came up, they trickled back into the timber. They knew where they could hide. I can't stress this point well enough that, you know, their behavior has completely adapted to keep them alive, if that makes sense. We talked about them being away from the road. They absolutely know where every single road is. They live in that place. They survive on those areas every day. They know where the roads are. They know the common places that hunters come in and out, and they know exactly where to go to get away from people. And in Kentucky, that's usually a deep, dark place that's hard to get to.
Example I like to use for this one, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
They respond to the hunting pressure, like you said. We've got 120, 130 GPS collars on elk right now. A couple years ago, I like to point this cow because she was just so interesting in her habits. But she would live up on a big public property that's a coal mine area. She would move up there about May 15th. She would have her calf, stay up there all summer with her calf, rearing it, nursing it. And then within 1 week of archery season, every single year for like 5 years until her collar died, within 1 week of archery season starting, she would go down the bottom, cross the road, cross the river, and get up on top of the second biggest mountain in the state and stay there. And where she was effectively, impossible for an elk hunter to reach her, right? So she's got this ultimate sanctuary. And then May 15th would come back around, she would go back up on the open, have her calf, and the cycle would repeat itself. But when those hunters come in, and that, we've talked about it so much, try not to blow them out, because they know this. They understand what it means when all of a sudden all these other dudes in camo carrying bows and guns come out. They know where to go. They're going to respond to it.
Yep. I agree. And, Joe and I are in an interesting spot, and really one of my favorite things to do, just being from in grad school and having the ability, we had GPS collars on a bunch of bulls, still do to this day, is to look at what they do. And one of the things when we put out the first batch of GPS collars on bulls in 2011, going into that 2011 elk season, it was like you took, you took some dice and just scattered them across the table. Everybody had lived in their little areas, basically where they were darted. They lived in that areas, were in their, summer bachelor groups. The week before elk season, they went to the wind, and I was tracking every one of these, multiple times a week, either on the ground or in an airplane. And it made my job hell there for a couple of weeks through the hunting season. But it goes to show that even then they knew, they got the rut kicking in. They've got their hormones are going wild. Their testosterone's going wild. But then they've also got that added pressure of, oh, hunters are here now. And it's one of those things that I think that is very underestimated, especially if people have known somebody that's hunted Kentucky elk in the past. And this is just the natural progression. If we took, let's say we took one of the elk units and had no hunting in it for 5 years, those elk would quickly adapt right back to that. Oh, I can do whatever I want most of the time. Well, we want people to be able to hunt that unit. So you've just got to be able to understand the fact that these things are smart. They're wise to hunters, and they're going to be back in places that are a little bit harder to get to. And you got to be able to go back in there and find them. So that's where I'm going with that one. A point that Joe put in there, and it's something that I always like to bring up, is don't pass on an elk the first day that you'd be happy to kill the last day. So with the fact that these elk are skittish, flighty, they are as wild as it gets nowadays. If you get that shot at a legal bull the first day, be thinking about it. It's definitely something to think about. It is essentially our Colorado mentality. Joe's got a bull tag this year for Colorado. He's going to shoot the first legal bull that comes by. I guarantee it. I don't even have to ask him. And that's not saying that's how you've got to play it. Scouting is going to give you an idea of what's available, and maybe you do target a bull, but be ready to capitalize if you've got a bull in range. So, it's one of those things that our elk aren't evenly distributed across the elk zone. They're herd type animals. They tend nowadays to live in smaller herds. There's no really big evolutionary pressure to stay in a big herd when you're in a place like Kentucky versus out on the Great Plains or in the open West. You're at an advantage to be in a group of 100 there. You let the wolf pick off the sick or the old elk. The other 99 go on to live their days. Here in Kentucky, we've got, denser habitat. We've got tree cover. We don't have any major predators of adult elk. And it's one of those things where now they're in these clumps of 5 to 10, maybe 3, maybe 15, that are much more stealthy, much more able to quietly escape when they hear a hunter coming. So it's just something that I want to get across, because I think a lot of people have a mentality that you're going to find an open area, you're going to be able to drive up there and at least glass up some elk, if not see some elk out there doing their thing. Used to be like that. It is not now. So that's probably the most hard truth of elk hunting in Kentucky. We've still got the elk. I guarantee it. They have wised up. They have gotten difficult to hunt. But that's not to say we still have, around a 50% success rate every year. So they're there for the taking. They're there for the hunting. They're fun to hunt. And again, so that was point number 13. This is not meant to scare anybody. It's meant to motivate. That's what I'm saying. So, it's one of those things. We just wanted to hit these points and hit them early to kind of put a fire under everybody to start thinking about this stuff. If you want to go out there and have the best time possible hunting elk, start thinking about this stuff. It's no different than what Joe and I or anybody else, from the East that's taking a trip out West is doing right now. So Joe, I'll let you throw in any thoughts you got on that last point, or closers or otherwise.
I think our last point's been covered pretty well. I mean, again, it's not to scare anybody or dissuade you or provide a cop out. It's just trying to let you guys know what it's actually like.
Yeah.
The days of driving up there and literally getting out of your truck, walking 2 steps and pulling the trigger on whichever elk you want are over. And in my opinion, that's a good thing, right? It shouldn't be shooting fish in the barrel. I mean, there are certainly places in Kentucky where you do see instances like that, but most of the time, those are going to be places that are very restricted on hunting or no hunting, and they have almost no other disturbance outside of hunting season, right? They're gated, the roads are blocked off, they're not getting harassed all the time. So they create these types of sanctuary areas where you, in essence, have some type of tame elk, right? What does that really mean, in terms of looking back? Like, yeah, I killed an elk, but did you work for it? Did you do any, how did that, was that really an elk hunting experience? So that's kind of the point of this conversation, just to let you guys know some of the things that we've dealt with in the past, trying to get you guys, up to speed, and I don't want to say temper your expectations, but at least let you know like what it's really like. We don't want people saying, or I don't want you to base the success or failure on your hunt this year in 2022 based off of what your best friend's uncle did in 2010 on this same property, right? It's just different. Everything changes. We've had a lot of change in our habitat. We have multiple changes to our hunting seasons and structures, right? They're going to respond to this stuff. As long as you're out there working hard at it, you'll have a great chance to fill your elk permit.
Yeah, and I will say, we'll take that a little bit further. A change that Joe made a couple of years ago for the 2019 season was actually getting rid of that big stretch of archery hunting that we had in October and November. And the major reason that we did that was to reduce pressure in terms of reduced disturbance and try to get them living a little bit more freely in these areas. If you run into a gate or you run into a sign that says no vehicular traffic, that's a strategy that we use to limit the disturbance in that area. It's a walk-in only type of area. These are all things that are big right now out west, and we're sort of seeing that come to fruition here in Kentucky. There's places out west, places in Colorado where they've limited shed hunting season so that hunters and other recreationists aren't up in the mountains during spring calving season, because they've found through research that that's detrimental to the population. So it's kind of one of those things that, we're learning every year as we go through our elk season and trying to figure a couple things out. And as the herd grows and as hunter numbers grow, we're seeing some things that are common to out west, such as disturbance, the whole idea of escape cover. And it's really good. We've got a healthy elk population. We got plenty of elk to hunt. And as Joe said, we don't want to give you any false, illusions that they're going to be standing in every open field out there. So if you got any questions on any of this stuff, holler at us. Happy to talk it over. If there's, one of these 13 points that you're interested in us expanding on further, let us know. If we don't already have a webinar episode, we'll be looking to throw one in there. We've got a couple of slots to fill before bull season comes around. So, all right, Joe, hit me with your official closer. Sum it up.
Be prepared. Do your homework. Make the best of it. Have a positive attitude and go have fun.
That's right. All right. So next week, just to remind you again, we're going to have a kind of a joint. This will be much more interactive, less us talking, more us showing stuff. And we'll also bring Mark Peterson in on the next one, introduce him to everybody. He's one of our newest members and the newest biologists in the elk program. So next week we'll be getting in shape, and then we're going to do like a day hunting bag dump, talk about some necessary gear. And with that, we'll get this up. Well, you'll be seeing it on the web. I always forget whether I'm talking to people or not. I'm just talking to Joe today. So either way. All right. This has been a long one. We appreciate everybody. Let us know if you got questions. Good luck, prepare, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks.